Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak. My name is Robert Esnouf from the University of Oxford, where I look after the computing in two of the departments there. That's the Wellcome Centre for Human Genetics and the Oxford Big Data Institute. And I run a research computing platform that's linked between those two sites. And today I'd like to spend a little time talking about how we've evolved our computing offering from something that's purely doing genetics computing in very traditional high throughput computing to a more sensitive, more varied healthcare computing platform. So the Wellcome Centre for Human Genetics was founded in 1994 to further the study of the underlying genetic causes of common diseases, and the building that I work in the photograph that was opened in 1999. It's hard to remember that, but back in 1994, genetics was largely a laboratory-based science. Indeed, it wasn't until 2001 that the initial draft of the first human genome was published, which was then refined in 2003. Short read sequencing, next generation sequencing, hit the Wellcome Centre in about 2007. In 2009, I stopped being a structural biologist full-time and went to try to organise the computing operations of the Human Genetics Centre. So the department is a very large producer of data as well as a very large analyzer of data. And it's not just genetics or genomics. There are many, many layers to the organisation of life, and genetics is really just the first layer. Genomics, epigenomics, transcriptomics, proteomics, metabolomics, and phenomics, how these present as observable features of a rich, very varied, very complex source of interlinked data. And not only do we have these layers, but these can change depending on the level of organization you're interested in, from within the cells, the organelles, through cells, organs, up to whole organisms, and indeed populations, you could argue. And as well, over time, these change, so age. And indeed, healthcare is essentially the study of phenomics in your environment as a vast, varied subject. You'll see that even all that variety is just a small, small part of the variety of data that has to be considered in studying human health and disease. The areas I've talked are mainly on the left-hand side of this figure, but you can look at there's far more medical records, employment records, the environment where you're living, looking at your social past, various imaging technologies that produce a vast picture of you, your health, your interactions with the world. And trying to exploit those big data problems for the study of human health, that's the purpose of the Oxford Big Data Institute, which opened in 2017. It brings together statisticians, epidemiologists, people interested in machine learning, software development, computation, to look over all the data that have been collected from the various areas around Oxford and the studies that Oxford leads. And this includes large population scale studies. UK Biobank is a leading one in there, looking at 500,000 individuals. There are similar biobanks in China and Mexico, which again are all being researched in the Big Data Institute. And as these data get more sensitive, closer to medical records, then we need much more control of the data access and sharing. The studies need to be set up with the ethical approval. We need to have consent of patients for bringing the data in. We need to be able to demonstrate that we have privacy and security to people who are looking around. We need information governance, both by following processes internally, but by active oversight from other bodies around the university. We need to be aware that the outcomes of some of these analyses could well lead to intellectual property, and the university has a strong legal arm looking at the exploitation of intellectual property. And we need to be developing and employing standards and protocols to show that we're capable of best practice. There are two main parts to the biomedical research computing facility that I run. There's the cluster, which is shown here. It's a high throughput cluster rather than a high performance cluster, very traditional grid engine cluster, mostly with 16 gigabytes of memory per core. It's a Univo grid engine cluster. The storage network is EDR, FDR, with 8:1 oversubscription on the way up, because we're not doing very much MPI type processing. This is mostly a storage fabric. The storage are being delivered off about 12 petabytes of DDN storage running spectrum scale. There's other storage on the network. And it's going into just over 6,000 cores of compute and about 100 GPU nodes. It's a fairly busy cluster. I said it's high throughput, and here are some recent just the number of jobs that we've run on the cluster: January 1.9 million, February 2.3 million. And then we can see in March, April, and May, it's ramped up to being over 3 million, now just over 3.5 million. This is the direct result of the COVID-19 emergency. We're well-established, stable cluster. There's lots of Oxford research going on. We are the first port of call for people wanting to do this sort of research. The other part of the BMRC infrastructure main part is a production Openstack Cloud. It is, as far as I'm aware, the only production Openstack Cloud in Oxford. It's not huge. It's about 1,300 cores. There are about another 40 GPUs in there. It's underpinned by a fast NVMe and BlueStore Ceph layer, and all the networking is open networking, Cumulus Ethernet. It was developed because we feel that we have to be giving a forward-looking view of computing to the researchers in Oxford to get them to explore these new architectures for doing their computing, for the extra control it gives. And indeed, we've started training students on there. So there's a cohort of doctoral students studying for clinical health sciences. And this is the first time Oxford has delivered cloud-based teaching on that cohort. I don't actually particularly do research anymore, but we are very close to the researchers. And we, like everybody, to some extent, has to sell ourselves. The two figures show the old computer room in the Wellcome Centre and the new one that we managed to put together in the Big Data Institute. And I think there's a very important line. This comes from one of the little flyers we've showed people. For a small research group, it's towards the bottom. For a small research group, getting all their cluster compute for £1,000 per year and storage at £60 per terabyte a year, we're offering exceptional value to researchers and funders alike. And that's the point. That is very attractive for people who have unstable research funding, who want a project, who want to deliver it. Provided they're doing biomedical research, they can come to us. We will set them up. And currently around about 20 Oxford departments are coming to us for us to help with their computing. The biomedical research computing has always commissioned all the equipment that is purchased in a standard way, even though the money comes from many, many different funding sources, underpinned by different departments to deliver different research outcomes. The only way we've been able to scale is by sticking to a standard way of commissioning equipment. The access to the systems is then entirely controlled administratively. And of course, the benefit is then that we can repurpose systems easily and often within minutes. If the members of the audience who've been working in biomedical research, you may have come across the UK Biobank study I mentioned before. For example, the genotyping study of 500,000 UK Biobank subjects. That basic computer was actually performed on our cluster, which is now out as the largest GWAS study that's available worldwide, I believe. There's a similar study based on the processing of the MRI analysis, functional MRI analysis of 20,000 UK Biobank subjects. Again, that was performed on our cluster last November and December. And these are providing some of the biggest, most valuable resources for looking at large population scale studies. I think the value of the way we set things up has been really put into strong light in the last few months. With the COVID-19 emergency, we were able to respond immediately and flexibly to the demands of the researchers who suddenly had all their research priorities changed. So all our computing priorities changed pretty much overnight. And we were able to repurpose all our resources without people having to purchase new equipment. You saw from just the number of jobs run that we jumped from just over 2 million to about 3.5 million jobs a month. They're not huge jobs. They're typically, I was checking, they're typically 30 to 40 minutes each. So this is the sort of work that in the last 3 months we have been doing on the BMRC cluster. So in the early stages, you would have heard talking about some of the epidemiology studies. The Fraser group, the Bonsall group in Oxford have contributed to those studies, and they've been using our facilities. Also, some of the early prototyping of the contact tracing apps were done on some of our facilities. There have been studies of the genetic markers of patients with COVID-19, again, based against those UK Biobank, these well-documented patients, and an equivalent MRI study of COVID-19 patients, again, against Biobank. It's not just we've been looking at research in the UK. The Gates Foundation has been interested in modeling how COVID-19 might spread in villages in Africa. And again, we've had studies done on these systems here. Structural biology is a strong third of the Wellcome Centre, particularly electron microscopy, and the UK National Electron Bioimaging Centre has been focusing on projects around COVID-19, and a large percentage of those data have been coming back to our facility to be processed, particularly the coronavirus spike protein and polymerase. Excuse me. Another project we were not able to do quite as much as we'd have liked on is the recovery trial run through the Nuffield Department of Population Health with Martin Landray. We were asked to do it, but we hadn't completed the relevant third-party security assessments, unfortunately. But we would have been able to do this, and they've been playing a very prominent role. You will have heard that this was the study that led to debunking the use of hydroxychloroquine, and also, as of Tuesday, the revelation that this dexamethasone looks like that can be quite effective for people who have very severe COVID-19. We have been supporting other work, antibodies studies, and also there have been groups coming to us where they're not just looking at the medical, but they're looking at the social and societal impacts of COVID-19. So we're very attractive for a huge range of research. I would just like to give one example of what is a stunningly complex collaboration that has been put together literally in weeks. Many different modes of collecting data, from sequencing, proteomics, which is mass spectroscopy, other sorts of data, looking at blood, looking at the markers in blood of how patients respond to COVID-19 treatment, how blood changes with COVID-19 infection. And the scale of this is that each of those names in red, that's a research group, often in different departments across Oxford, who needed somewhere to come together to be able to share, pool, analyze the data, curate the data, work out and share. And I'm very pleased to say that we have been the place where they've moved to. This represents about 60 different researchers already. This project has been running for less than a month. There are initial results on this. What you see on the left-hand side largely corresponds to cluster work. We're seeing on the right-hand side is as those data then flowing through into more analysis phases, and that is largely going to be done on our cloud. So I think this just shows the flexibility, the value we can have under intense pressure to respond. And it's not stopping. The last one, this project was announced on the Oxford website on Monday, the National Consortium for Intelligent Medical Imaging, looking at imaging to see how COVID-19 affects the lungs of patients. I haven't been asked whether we will support this, but I'm sure they will, because the National Consortium of Intelligent Medical Imaging is based in the Big Data Institute in Oxford, and we have been providing them compute resources, but it's so soon that they haven't even had a chance to have the email conversation. But we will, of course, help them with all the resources we have to spare. So we're very busy at the moment. We do quite a bit. We have some problems with what we do. We have things we'd like to change. And so for the last few slides, really, I would just like to consider what is it we'd like to change. And particularly, obviously, this is a storage event. What are our storage limitations? So we're currently a spectrum scale shop for the cluster, so via InfiniBand. We have some Ceph and S3 served by Cumulus Ethernet into our cloud. And we're struggling that some of the AI workloads can demand extreme performance, extreme numbers of IOPS. And we're not as linked together as we should be. We need to address that. Improving the export of spectrum scale into the cloud. We're literally just about to commission NFS for exports into the cloud. It's not a perfect solution. It's a workaround at best, but I think it's a start. But what it will allow us is it'll allow us virtual login nodes for the cluster, and will allow us long-lived project servers where people explore the data. The volumes of data keep going up. We're quite a small facility, but we're quite storage rich already. We have a simple, affordable charging model. And because people know exactly what they're going to have to pay for, they're coming to us in very large numbers. The new DDN system, it's a GS14KX, was finally commissioned in January this year. We moved 1 and a bit petabytes onto there before it came into service. We're now having to accept the fact that before the end of the year, that will be full, and we're going to have to double it up to the 10 petabytes. And this is largely reflecting COVID-19 data that are flooding in all the time. What are our main problems? Well, probably our biggest concerns around improving our data security, our data governance. The native GPFS clients on the cluster clearly carries risks. You're pushing something where if you exploit a route on a compute node, you have an awful lot of access to the spectrum scale systems. We're having challenges, as other people have had to work around, the password-free route access that goes around GPFS spectrum scale clusters. We also need to move towards getting more encryption at rest and in flight. And really, what matters is to get auditable process separation between the jobs our users are running, but without using the efficiency of our clusters. We would always like more performance, particularly for AI type workloads, where when we're starting to see semi-supervised and unsupervised learning runs, number of IOPS can be extreme. We had a small workaround where we've had centrally provisioned flash data. We were getting on quite well with it, but that startup company has now been consumed. We do need to find something to allow us to scale and plan. And the volumes of data are just going up. And it's not just the high performance, it's the midterm, the long-term storage of data. We need resilient multi-site storage solutions. What might be our solutions? Well, we're certainly going to explore a new high-performance file system that can support IO-intensive work across the cluster and the cloud. We're interested in having quotas at the directory level, not the user level, snapshots on off-site, disaster recovery, backup. Really needs to be able to support those burst loads for AI. We would like to see the convergence of the networking, and indeed we may move the cluster away from InfiniBand to Ethernet and move the provisioning of the cluster to Ansible within the OpenStack setup. And we would like to be at a point where each group can only ever mount and see storage that is relevant to them, that each group perhaps has a set of keys that we're managing on their behalf. I think many of those features are something that we're looking along with interest in the developments of Exascaler, and certainly listening to the new features of Exascaler is one of the reasons that I'm here today. And could this be a way forwards? We also need some very large scale secure multi-site storage. This needs to serve object block and file, and we're talking tens to hundreds of petabytes. We live in I work in a decentralized university. The network gives the options of moving data around. And again, I believe that with a simple consumption model and a simple charging model, that very large quantities of data will be entrusted to us for long-term, mid-term archive. And of course, we will look at other remote sites and public cloud resources as well. So I think I'm getting to the end of my time. The last thing I should do, if I move on one slide, is acknowledge the people who really do an incredible amount of work. I'm one of a team of 5 people. I have 2 people in the Welcome Center, John Diprose and Colin Freeman, and 2 people in the Big Data Institute, Adam Huffman and Jeff Ferrari, who work incredibly hard, incredibly skilled, and in the last 3 months have put in incredible hours to be supportive almost 24/7, to keep systems running, to respond to issues without moaning one bit. I should say BMRC exists not because it was a central edict we should exist, but because of the personal support of many senior scientists across Oxford. I won't name them all, but these people have had the vision that Oxford should have a biomedical compute platform and have encouraged us to grow, vision to learn. And then, of course, there is money. We've been long-term supported by the Wellcome Trust, the Wellcome Centre for Human Genetics, and the National Institute of Health Research, Bioinformatics Research centres support work in the BDI. And thank you very much for your attention.